improve public confidence in elections and reduce the risk of fraud, wanted to bring Australia into line with other liberal democracies. The Morrison government's legislation was simply that we should produce an ID at the polling booth. You need an ID to buy grog, you need an ID to open a bank account. For a driver's licence, you've got to produce everything, birth certificate, the lot. But isn't this more crucial than any of that? But you don't have to prove who you are.
It's far more crucial. It's the most important act that any citizen can undertake in a given
Correct.
period, and that is determining who is going to be the government of their state or of our country. And the recommendations that the Joint Standing Committee made and the government adopted were very, very basic. You could use your Medicare card. You could use an electricity bill. It was not about stopping people from voting. It was about ensuring that those who did vote were entitled to vote, and they had a form of ID to justify that vote.
But Labor and Anthony Albanese said that such legislation, I'm quoting exactly, requiring us to produce an ID was, quote, a desperate attempt to undermine our strong democracy and deny Australians their basic democratic rights. This is a cynical move to minimise the number of Indigenous Australians who get the vote. James, an ID? What?
And this is how outrageous those slurs were on us, because they did. I was called a racist. The government was called a racist for wanting all Australians, regardless of their colour or their creed, to have a form of ID. But what we did say, and what the government legislation reflected, was that those Indigenous Australians in remote communities who may not have ID, that their identity could be vouched for. And anyone who actually didn't have ID could be issued with a declaration vote until their identity had been ascertained. So very simple, a safeguard to protect all Australians. But what this says to me, Alan, is the Greens and Labor
are up to something.
They've got a bit of a cover up to something here.
And let's prove our point. Now, Malcolm Turnbull got over the line by the width of a cigarette paper in 2016. 3 months after that, in July, 3 months after that election, which he won, as I said, by the width of a cigarette paper, the Sydney Morning Herald reported this, and I quote, more than 18,000 people have been asked to explain why they apparently voted more than once at the federal election. Despite heavy fines and the risk of jail time for multiple voting. Now listen to this. 2 people were marked off the electoral roll 11 times on July 2, voting day. A further 2 people had their names marked off 5 times. 4 others had 4 marks and 51 people had 3. James, what's been done about all of this? Up to 18,343 people were asked why their name was checked off more than once.
Well, the answer is bugger all, but it's actually scarier than you outlined there, Alan, in that the federal seat of Herbert, which we lost by 37 votes, there were 200 cases of multiple voting in that seat. And the AEC made the decision not to prosecute anyone. So the ball is firmly in the court of the AEC, but what the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters have recommended is not just do you need voter ID, but something that's called the electronic certified list, which is, a bit of a gobbledygook for just saying the electoral roll should be electronic. It's not electronic voting. It's an electronic roll. So once Alan Jones votes, your name gets marked off.
Absolutely.
And that stops.
But
and
I mean, if 12 people voted in James McGrath's name, they got no hope of finding who these other 12 people were. I mean, there were 6,760 instances of multiple voting in New South Wales. 4,000. This is the Turnbull election. 4,800 in Victoria. 2,792 in Queensland. I mean, this is all going to happen again, and we really don't know whether the government that will be elected is the government that is entitled to govern. Can I just come back to you this issue about inflation now, high inflation,